Before The Big Valley ever aired, Barbara Stanwyck had appeared in 85 feature films, received 4 Academy Award nominations, won 3 Emmy Awards, and become, at various points between 1941 and 1944, the highest-paid woman in America. She was 57 years old when the show premiered on ABC on September 15, 1965. She would perform many of her own stunts. At one point during production, her stunt double was unavailable when a scene required her to plunge into a river. Stanwyck did it herself. At 58, hit the rocks on the way in and sustained severe bruising across her back, side, and stomach. She refused to delay production. The crew that watched it happen understood, in that moment, exactly who they were working with. For 4 seasons, The Big Valley was among the most elegantly produced westerns on American television, a family drama set on the vast Barkley Ranch in California's San Joaquin Valley in the 1870s, with a cast of enough quality and a matriarch of enough genuine screen power that the genre conventions it inhabited felt, in the best episodes, like something closer to literature. It ran until 1969, when the same network decision that canceled Gunsmoke and Bonanza and half a dozen other Western series, the so-called Rural Purge, a pivot away from rural and Western programming toward urban demographics that advertisers wanted, ended it in spite of consistent ratings. The show never recovered from its cancellation because it never had the chance to try. Today, 2 of its 5 principal cast members are still alive, the rest are gone, and their stories are worth telling in full. Number 1 is Barbara Stanwyck, who played Victoria Barkley, the matriarch, the widow, the woman who held the Barkley Ranch together across 4 seasons with a combination of iron will and genuine warmth that was the most complete distillation of everything Barbara Stanwyck knew how to do, and who was, at the time of the show's premiere, already one of the most consequential figures in the history of American film. She was born Ruby Catherine Stevens on July 16, 1907, in Brooklyn, New York, the youngest of 5 children. Her mother was killed when Barbara was 4 years old, struck by a trolley and thrown from it, and her father, failing to cope with the loss, joined a construction crew heading to the Panama Canal and was never seen again. She and her siblings were placed in foster care. Her older sister, a chorus girl, eventually took her in. Barbara was dancing at the Ziegfeld Follies at 16. She took the stage name Stanwyck from a playbill. By 1930, she was a film star. Frank Capra used her in 3 films. Howard Hawks used her. Cecil B. DeMille, Fritz Lang, Billy Wilder, who cast her in Double Indemnity in 1944, the film noir that defined the femme fatale archetype for American cinema, in a performance that the American Film Institute would later rank as one of the greatest in Hollywood history. She was nominated for the Academy Award 4 times and never won. In 1944, she was the highest-paid woman in the United States. In 1982, the Academy gave her an honorary Oscar. She received it with the kind of candor she had always applied to everything. "There is no greater honor," she said, "and I'll share it with the man who has always been there for me, my golden guy, Mr. Robert Wagner." Victoria Barkley was a specific kind of strength, the strength of someone who had lost a husband, who was running a business empire in hostile territory, who was raising sons capable of violence in a world that sometimes required it, and who had decided that decency and love were worth fighting for anyway. Stanwyck played that strength without sentimentality and without apology. She was, in her 60s, as completely in command of a scene as she had been in her 30s. When she performed her own stunts, it was not because she was reckless. It was because she understood that Victoria Barkley would have done them herself, and she was not willing to have someone else be more Victoria Barkley than she was. Linda Evans, who played her daughter Audra, later said that after her own mother died during the production years, Stanwyck stepped in and took on that absent maternal role. That is the kind of woman she was, someone who saw what was needed and filled the space without being asked. She never married again after her divorce from Robert Taylor in 1952. She lived privately, grew close to her co-stars, and when she was asked in her later years whether she had any regrets about the career, she said, "I intend to go on acting until I'm 90, and they won't need to paste my face with makeup." She did not make 90. She got to 82. Barbara Stanwyck died on January 20, 1990, at her home in Santa Monica, California, of congestive heart failure and chronic obstructive lung disease. At her request, no funeral or memorial service was held. She had arranged to be cremated. Her ashes were scattered over Lone Pine, California, the high desert country near the Sierra Nevada mountains, where dozens of the Western films that built her career had been shot. The woman who played the most powerful matriarch in television Western history chose to leave no address. She is in the desert where the Westerns were made, in the dust of the films that made her, and in Lone Pine there is nothing to visit because that is how she wanted it. Number 2 is Richard Long, who played Jared Barkley, the eldest son, the lawyer, the family's intellectual presence and moral deliberator, and who brought to that role a quiet dignity that balanced the more physically demonstrative performances around him. He was born on December 17, 1927, in Chicago, Illinois. His career began in his teens. He was signed to Universal Pictures before he was 20, and he built a steady resume through the 1950s that included a series of romantic lead roles and a significant turn in the 1956 Universal comedy, The Creature from the Black Lagoon sequel, Revenge of the Creature. He had appeared in the Barbara Stanwyck anthology series before the producers cast him as Jared, a coincidence that made the on-screen mother-son dynamic feel, when they first worked together, like something that had been rehearsed. What most viewers never knew about Richard Long is the grief that preceded the Big Valley. In 1953, he had fallen in love with actress Suzanne Ball, a rising Universal contract player who was Frank Capra's first choice for a major role before health problems intervened. Ball was diagnosed with cancer in her legs shortly after their engagement. They married anyway. On April 11, 1954, Suzanne Ball had her right leg amputated in a desperate attempt to stop the disease. She died on August 5, 1955, less than 2 years into their marriage, at age 25. Long spent the following decade rebuilding. He married Mara Corday in 1957, and they had 3 children. He came to the Big Valley carrying a history of loss that never appeared on screen, but that gave Jared Barkley his particular quality of stillness, a man who had learned that what mattered required protecting because it could be taken without warning. If these stories mean something to you, please subscribe. Every detail in this script was researched and verified. Your subscription keeps this channel alive. Richard Long died of heart failure on December 21, 1974, in Los Angeles, California, just 5 years after the Big Valley ended. At age 47, he had experienced heart problems for some time before his death. His wife Mara Corday was at his side. He is buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. The eldest Barkley son, the one who argued for reason and law in a world that frequently preferred force, went first, the youngest of the show's losses, before most of his castmates had begun to think about what endings looked like. Number 3 is Peter Breck, who played Nick Barkley, the hot-tempered, physically dominant second son, the one most likely to solve a problem with his fists, and most likely to be right about needing to, and who was the son of a jazz musician, born on March 29, 1929, in Haverhill, Massachusetts, into a household where Fats Waller and Bix Beiderbecke and Billie Holiday were the names in his father's life. He attended the University of Texas, served in the military, and built a television career through westerns, appearing on Maverick as Doc Holliday opposite James Garner, on Black Saddle as a gunman turned lawyer. Before the Big Valley gave him 4 seasons of the role that defined his public identity. Nick Barkley was the character who kept the ranch safe when safety required violence. Peter Breck played him with a physical authority that was never cartoonish and a temper that the writing understood as love, a man who was aggressive precisely because what he was protecting mattered to him more than he could say. He stayed close with Barbara Stanwyck after the show ended. In the mid-1980s, he moved to Vancouver, British Columbia, where he worked in theater and opened an acting school that he ran until his health declined. What most viewers never knew is the decade of deterioration that preceded his death. His wife Diane announced on the Big Valley Writing Desk website that he had been hospitalized since January 10, 2012, suffering from dementia. He died on February 6, 2012, in Vancouver. He was 82. His wife of 51 years was with him. The son of a jazz musician who became the most physically formidable Barkley died in the city where he had spent the last chapter of his life building something for other actors. His burial location in Vancouver has not been widely publicized. The big temper and the big heart are both quiet now. Number 4 is Lee Majors, who played Heath Barkley, the illegitimate son, the outsider who had to prove himself to the family that was already his by blood before it recognized him by choice, and who is alive in 2026 at age 87, a fact that most people who know him primarily from the $6 Million Man would find appropriate given the character character's documented resilience. He was born Harvey Lee Yeary on April 23, 1939, in Wyandotte, Michigan. His parents died when he was young, his father in an accident, his mother shortly after, and he was raised by his aunt and uncle, taking the surname Majors from them. He attended Eastern Kentucky University on an athletic scholarship, was drafted by the New Orleans Saints NFL franchise in 1961, and turned to acting after a knee injury ended the athletic career before it began. Heath Barkley was the show's most emotionally complex figure, the young man who had grown up knowing his father was Thomas Barkley without Thomas Barkley knowing he existed, who had to navigate the grief of a father's death at the same moment as the revelation of a family he had never had. Majors played that specific loneliness with a physical stoicism that made the character's hunger for belonging feel genuinely moving rather than melodramatic. When he left the Big Valley in 1969, he had been in American living rooms for 4 seasons, as a character defined by a specific kind of earned acceptance. What came next is the detail that made him a cultural phenomenon of a different order entirely. The $6 Million Man, which premiered in 1973 and ran for 5 seasons, cast Majors as Colonel Steve Austin, a former astronaut whose bionic reconstruction after a catastrophic accident gave the 1970s one of its defining fantasy heroes. Every child in America who watched the show spent the following decade pretending to run in slow motion and making the sound. That cultural imprint is so complete that Lee Majors at 87 is still primarily associated by a significant portion of the population with the sound of bionic reconstruction. The Fall Guy followed from 1981 to 1986, giving him a third defining television character in 3 different decades. He appeared in David Leitch's 2024 film adaptation of The Fall Guy. He is in 2026 one of the most durably recognizable faces in American television history. Number 5 is Linda Evans, who played Audra Barkley, the Barkley daughter, the youngest principal cast member of the show, the character through whom the show explored what it meant to be young, female, and wealthy in the frontier West, and who is alive in 2026 at age 83, carrying a career biography that connects 2 of the most watched television dramas of the 1960s and 1980s in the same person. She was born Linda Evanstad on November 18, 1942, in Hartford, Connecticut, and had been appearing in episodic television since age 18 before the Big Valley made her a recognizable face. She was 22 when the show premiered. She was the youngest of the Barkley children on screen, and the relationship she developed with Barbara Stanwyck during production, a bond that became, after her own mother's death, something close to a maternal relationship, gave her something the character's scenes alone could not have manufactured: the genuine warmth of a young woman who trusted the older woman on set completely. What most viewers of the Big Valley never knew about Linda Evans is that she had auditioned for the role of Audra Barkley 3 times before being cast. The producers were unsure she had the presence for the show's leading family. Stanwyck, who had final approval over the casting of her on-screen children, insisted on Evans after watching her final test. The approval was unconditional. Evans later said that being chosen by Barbara Stanwyck was one of the most significant events of her career, not because of what it meant for the show, but because of what it meant to have Stanwyck believe in her specifically. Dynasty followed the Big Valley, giving Evans Crystal Carrington, the good woman, the loyal wife, the moral center of a show organized around glamour and scheming for 9 seasons from 1981 to 1988. She retired formally from acting in 1997 and has made only occasional appearances since. She lives quietly in 2026 at 83, the last surviving female principal of the Big Valley, the woman who Stanwyck chose and who spent her career honoring that choice by doing the work as fully as the woman who believed in her had always done. They ended up in the Sierra Nevada desert, in Glendale, in Vancouver, in a suburban California retirement, and in whatever 87 looks like when your character ran in slow motion for 5 television seasons. Barbara Stanwyck is in the dust of the westerns, at Lone Pine, where nobody goes to visit because she wanted it that way. The woman who danced at the Ziegfeld Follies at 16 and hit the rocks on a river bottom at 58 and told her crew to keep filming. She made 85 films and 4 seasons of a television western and received an honorary Oscar at 74 and said she would keep going until she was 90. She almost made it. The ashes went to Lone Pine, to the high desert, to the country where she had always been most herself. It is the right address for someone whose definition of strength was never about avoiding what hurt, but about not letting what hurt stop you. Richard Long is at Forest Lawn, gone at 47, the first departure, the eldest son taken too early by the same same kind of quiet cardiac failure that the westerns he worked in would have given to a villain. Peter Breck is in Vancouver, the school still there, the students he trained long since out in the world doing the work he taught them. The temper is the thing people remember about Nick Barkley. The patience is the thing the actors he trained remember about the man. And Lee Majors at 87, Linda Evans at 83, the half-brother and the sister, still here, still the faces that sat around the Barkley table for 4 seasons of a show that a network canceled in a memo, and that audiences have never quite agreed to let go. If these stories meant something to you, leave a comment below. I read every reply.